Good morning and welcome to the Point. In the most recent election, there were a lot of names on the ballot. A lot of those names you probably knew. But there were two other important names associated with Decision 2014 that didn't appear anywhere on that ballot. Those names were Lon Johnson, the chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party, and Bobby Schostak, the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party. They had a big influence on the outcome of the election. This morning, we sat down with the Michigan Republican Party chairman, Bobby Schostak. Mr. Chairman, let me start by saying congratulations on what ended up to be a very good night for Republicans, but as we were just talking, not one that I necessarily foresaw going in, because the polling and the numbers in this race were pretty close. Give me your take as one who's been around this for a while.
Right.
Not your first election night. What were you feeling going into that Tuesday night waiting for return?
Well, clearly it was nerve-wracking. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We expected a turnout about what we saw. We weren't expecting any kind of record numbers. We knew it would be close. We were modeling this in the 4-point range, right from the beginning, go back a year ago. And it ended up right about there, but because the way the polling was bouncing around and all the media, all the advertising that was going on, all the negative stuff being thrown at the governor, it was hard to really get comfortable that we had our arms around this thing. You
said you were modeling this as a 4-point race. Now, I don't want to get too far into the weeds because it'll be like two political geeks sitting here talking, but that's pretty much what you got.
Right.
Why did you model it as a 4-point race? Because as an observer, and our polling indicated that this race was considerably further apart than this when it began. Now, it certainly closed up over the summertime.
Sure.
We can talk about that. But our polling at least indicated that this was at least twice that margin.
Right. Well, we knew if we built everything on a conservative level around a 4-point range, that we would be comfortable outside of any recalls, outside of any efforts to, 11th hour kind of activity that would, surprise everybody, that we could keep our base intact and get our voters out. Early on, we built a political plan. Probably 15 months before the election, it started opening offices, building technology, knowing how to get in touch with the absentee voters, and really turning out our base and making certain we were going to be there on election day. So this was a culmination of a lot of work, through a good, almost really, you could argue that in December of this year of 14, it'll be 2 years since we started building this political plan.
Talk about that. I want to get back to these results in this race, but you've already touched on it a little bit. These are the things that people who aren't intimately involved in politics don't quite get. They know that you have an office building in Lansing, your counterparts have one a few blocks down the road, and they know that there's a state party. They know that you have a convention, but beyond that, they may not know what you do. This really is, and I would say, again, for both parties, a very broad-based effort to make sure that you're doing the outreach. And a lot of that's not glamorous work, but it's work that ultimately ends up paying off. Why do you think that yours paid off in better numbers than your friends over on Townsend?
Well, look, it's ground game, meaning we got to get out in touch, communicate our message, talk about our candidates, and convince the voters, the citizens of Michigan, that there's a real good reason to reelect the governor and the team. And early on, we knew that it's a Democrat-leaning state, that the governor had to protect his record, defend his record, that he's a relentless positive guy, that he's not going to go after and start blaming the past and taking a lot of credit for the future. He's going to just talk about Michigan as a project, as Michigan as needing solutions, and to look, it was going to be up to us to really inform the voters of all of the successes of this administration. So early on, messaging, identifying likely voters, getting in touch with our base, turning them out on election day, building technology to support it, all about, really a comprehensive effort, deeper, wider than ever before in our history, to the point where we made over 4 million voter contacts. And it's pretty unique in Michigan to be able to do that. And I think those things all led to, a totality of an effort that turned out enough voters on the ticket for Republicans to sweep the ticket.
You said you made 4 million contacts. Put that in context, because if you're making 4 million contacts, you are dealing with a whole lot of folks out there trying to convince them to go out. When you make those contacts, what are they based on? I don't want you to give away your secrets, but right. I mean, you have to be able to make sure you're contacting the right people, or it's a waste of time.
Right. Well, we wanted to turn out more of the lower propensity voters, okay? That the traditional Republican voters, our traditional GOP base, they would be there. But in order to make certain we had to at least that 4-point victory, that modeling that I talked about, we needed to be in touch with a wider range of voters, folks that maybe don't always vote in every gubernatorial cycle, folks that we could lift them up and get them to be thinking about why this election was that important. So engaging early, often, deeper, with frequency, through our offices and through our technology, through our volunteers, through our paid staff. Those are the kinds of things that inspire folks to come out and support your candidates. And we think we did a pretty good job getting that message out to them.
You describe Governor Snyder as being relentlessly positive, and obviously the RPA is something that he has talked about a lot. And I can tell you, as somebody who's observed him closely, perhaps twice in the course of now nearly 5 years that I've been following him, have I seen him even close to being upset about something. I'm sure he does but he does that behind closed doors. But if he is relentlessly positive as an observer, and you can certainly take exception to this, he does not appear to be a relentless campaigner. In fact, he seems to be a very reluctant campaigner when it comes to this. Did that impact this election in any significant way? Because there are people within your own party that will say privately in August and September they didn't think the governor was out pressing the flesh the way that they would have expected.
Right. Well, the governor has his way of doing things, and his way is not to take credit, not to place blame, to be positive about the future, and to give the voters, the citizens of Michigan, a opportunity to see a brighter future. And as a result, he's not going to go negative. He's not going to place the blame on the Granholm years. He's not going to, knock around his opponent. He's going to want to stay on plan about the future of the state. The state party, on the other hand, needs to show that contrast, and we did. We know what that lost decade was like with Granholm and Schauer being in the Senate, and reminding voters that this was so dark years in Michigan. And going back to that would be more dark years for Michigan. And the fact that we have balanced budgets and reformed the schools and gone through probably every facet of state government and asked the tough questions and brought in the less regulation on businesses, tax policy, and on and on. We need to talk about that, and we did. And I think as a result, the voters responded to it. It's not the governor's style, though.
We use our own modeling. You talk about yours. We use our own when we were starting to look at election results. And we had representative precincts that we were watching. And we were able relatively early on to say that Governor Snyder was going to be reelected. You talked with one of our reporters in Detroit at about the same time and said you would wait until the numbers came in. As you were waiting and watching those numbers come in, and it's always prudent not to claim victory before one knows one has victory.
Right.
Was there a point at the night that you said, aha, we won this race, or were you pretty much there by the time the polls closed?
No, we weren't there when the polls closed. But we had a nice lead building kind of early in the evening. We saw the strength of Oakland County. We saw that the Detroit vote was down from where it was. Wayne County was not quite as strong for Schauer as maybe they had expected overall. So there were some indicators that made us feel pretty good. But as you know, as the night went on, a 7 or 8 point margin narrowed down to about a 4-point margin in the end. So it was a close race, but we got our people out and did what we needed to do to win. But I don't think there's ever a moment that you really feel that I can relax until it is that you get towards that 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. There's enough votes in across the state, representative of a good sampling of the state, that you can say it's time to celebrate.
As the chairman of the party, you deal with the campaigns, you deal directly with the candidates, but you deal with a whole lot of rank and file Republicans who consider themselves part of the party. Given the fact that you say 11 o'clock, 11:30 is when you start to get comfortable, was there nervousness in the Republican electorate, if you will, leading up to that period of time? Because I know people I talk to, and again, even me looking at polls, having uncertainty about the outcome, Was there an uncertainty and nervousness among the supporters that you're in contact when you were talking with people?
Well, they were looking to us to show that confidence, and we weren't going to be out there showing that confidence yet. So there was some nervousness, reluctance. I think that when a couple of the agencies called it early, they were wondering, where are you guys and why aren't you there yet? What do you know that we don't know? And basically, we're watching to make certain there was enough turnout in the bigger voting blocks of the state to have that comfort level. But look, when we started watching the state house races come in, and we were going to increase our number of House seats, and in fact added a Senate seat, it was then pretty clear that this was going to be a great night for us, and it turned out to be.
By the time you got the governor's race called and that you were comfortable and the governor was able to go out after a whole bunch of other statewide elected officials were claiming victory, you knew you'd lost that U.S. Senate race. Those numbers had been trailing away from you for weeks, if not months. Going into that election night, that was going to be an uphill battle. Reconcile for me how a Republican governor under strong attack from a Democratic challenger and the Democratic Governors Association and others wins in an environment where by a considerable percentage between his winning margin and the losing margin of the Republican candidate for senator. How does that come about? That requires a lot of people to go into that poll and make a conscious decision to vote for a Republican governor and then skip down and vote for, or skip that race altogether, or vote for the Democrat. How does that happen?
Well, I think that's exactly what happened. Look, Terry worked hard, but she had a lot of negative thrown at her for a lot of weeks, months at end. And it was unfortunately sticking, and she was not able to, fight it off. And as a result, I think people were following the story, so to speak. The media picked up on it, and she slipped deeper and deeper. Now, there was a period of time there where the president's approval rating was in those mid-40s, and Gary Peters didn't get above the mid-40s, that depending upon the strength overall of our ticket, that it looked like, Terry might still be able to pull this out. But once Gary Peters broke into that 49-50 range, 10 days out, 12 days out, it was pretty evident that this was going to be a tough night for Terry. But people, I think, did split their ticket. People did skip the seat altogether, the Senate seat altogether, and that did affect us around the ballot as a result of it.
More of what the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party has to say about Decision 2014's outcome next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Decision 2014 is largely in the books, but there were some surprises. In fact, some observers were surprised by the very fact that Republicans were able to increase their margins in both the House and the Senate. We continue our conversation now with Michigan Republican Party Chairman Bobby Schostak. You mentioned just a couple of moments ago state Senate, state House races. Let's start with the state House, and you can talk about any of those races you want to. Right. I want to focus on the ones in West Michigan. There were two that I was watching from the get-go, and those were one, which is a constant swing seat, which is the 91st, where Representative Colleen Lamonti, the Democrat, beat the then Republican sitting representative Holly Hughes 2 years ago.
Right.
The rematch this time around with only a handful of votes, few dozen votes, separated, appears that Holly Hughes will be the new incoming representative. In the 76th, where there's some long history about how that race all ended up as it was, Winnie Brinks won a convincing victory over a Republican challenger there, so you got a split. Those were the ones that I was watching early on, but as it came along later, the 62nd looked like it might be in play. Before we move to the Senate, talk about those House races and how you as a party went in and really targeted those races that you thought were tight and what that did to your overall turnout, because you weren't just doing this big broad approach. You were looking at individual races for turnout to impact an improbable increase in the state House.
Right. We knew it would be difficult to increase the seats in the state House. We wanted to break 60, hoping to get to 61. We knew it was a heavy lift. However, there were really some very specific micro-level activities that we could stimulate some votes, which we did. And that was using our technology, having precinct operations on a very micro level so that we could turn votes out and make sure that all that voter identification activity turned out on election day. And we, in fact, were able to just get enough votes in a couple of those districts. Not all of them. Some of these districts on the West Michigan are very tough for Republicans. Others are more swing, like you mentioned with Holly. And she might, that could be very much a 2010, 12, 14, 16 back and forth, before we ever really settle in on it being one district or the other. But I think that it proves that the ground game makes a difference. When you can really get the volunteers and the paid staff and the technology and the messaging early on working together and followed through all the way to election night, right up until the polls close, making sure the people you've been in touch with show up on election night, right there at 6, 7 o'clock, get in line to vote if they're not there already, and literally us making calls to turn them out. That's what made the difference.
I want to talk about at least the Senate in just a minute, but this puts me in mind of a question that I sometimes ponder. You deal with Reince Priebus in Washington, who's the chairman of the Republican National Committee. You deal, one of the last shows that we did together, you were in Chicago at a national committee meeting, and you were at our sister station there doing a satellite interview. You play the political game, if you don't mind me calling that, on a national scale.
Sure.
And now you're talking to me about precinct politics in Muskegon County in order to get a state representative elected. The chasm between those two is wide. How do you cover, I know you've got staff, and I know you have very competent people, but still as chairman, how do you cover that ground? Because that's a lot of territory to cover.
Well, you never can forget that all politics are local. You never forget that this is about a precinct operation. And we have national goals and national support from the RNC. The Victory 365 program that we adopted here in Michigan came out of the RNC back right after the 12 elections, which is to be in all places, all coalitions of voters, year-round, 24/7, never stop talking to the voters. We deployed that in Michigan earlier than any other state in the nation. And as a result, key precincts got our attention. Key House seats got our attention. We worked very closely with our partners in the House and the Senate. Where can the state party make a difference? Where can we make an impact? And we had a pretty wide swath, and we have pretty good support financially from our donor community that we're able to play in areas and do things in Michigan that most state parties are not able to do. And we have this candidate assistance program. It's very significant what we're able to do with the dollars and go out and make an impact in these races. And the unions are big helping the Dems. Well, we're right there with the support we get from our donor community that helps us make a big impact. And I think that's why we did win House seats.
One of my best sources for all things, both policy and politics, who I talk to on an off-the-record capacity on a regular basis, told me pretty early on in the cycle that they believed Republicans could end up with 27 Senate seats. And I laughed because it's unprecedented, or at least in the time that I've been covering. Perhaps if you go back to the 50s, there was a time, but 27 seats out of a 38-member body. The 20th Senate district in West Michigan is Kalamazoo County.
Right.
That county is relatively evenly split, more or less represented, the largest chunks of it, by a Democrat, Sean McCann, who was the sitting representative, and Margaret O'Brien, the Republican representative from the west and south part of that district, that county. The two of them were locked into a battle where a third-party candidate, a former Republican representative, now calls himself a libertarian, would have, from a conventional wisdom standpoint, been thought to take votes away from the Republican candidate. Yet as it stands, as we sit here, and I don't overlook the possibility there could be a challenge, but as we sit here, Republicans won that by the narrowest of margin, gives you 27 seats in the Senate. Did you realistically think going into this cycle, I mean, that you would expand? My expectation was that Republicans would maintain a majority, but they might lose part of that supermajority, maybe to 23 or 24 at very least.
Right. There was clearly a plausible argument to be at 24 or 25. Honestly, I don't think anybody expected. Maybe Randy Richardville did in his dreams and aspirations to get to 26 or more again. We didn't really see that coming. We knew how to play and where to emphasize, where to put dollars, where to put human resources. But if we could have kept this at a 25 seat, we've been very pleased with the evening. The fact we went to 27 is kind of like winning the Super Bowl for us.
One of the things that those people who will dissect this race will say, and things the Democrats are already saying, is, well, look, of course you won in those House races and those Senate races because That's the way the districts have been drawn. And guess who drew the districts? Well, the Republicans have drawn them for the last two, at least redistricting times. How much of that plays into your hand?
Well, look, 59 seats from 63 seats, right? It's now back to 63 seats. It's not the lines. Honestly, it's the ground game. We worked it hard. We worked, I think, it pretty smart. Early on, we set our goals to make certain that we had a ground game that was to get this message out and turn vote out. We were very stealth about it. We didn't set our big goals out there publicly. I know the other side talked about this big absentee ballot program, and look, we knew that we were going to work towards turning out our low propensity voters. And that was a big effort on our part. We knew in 2010, Governor Snyder won it with a support from across the board. It wasn't just Republican support. We would need to make a lot of that up. How were we going to do it? And we went out and did it. And I think that at the end of the day, it's really credit to the team all the way across the state, our volunteers, our activists, Tea Party folks, everybody who worked together to really turn the vote out.
If we know anything, the election 2 years ago has nothing to do with the election 2 years from now, or very little, so it would appear in Michigan. You, as a party, have been pretty successful in off-year elections. I don't need to remind you, but for the courtesy of our viewers, you haven't won a presidential general since '88 here in the state of Michigan.
Thank you.
How do you take this, or do you? How do you take this, and again, with lower voter turnout than you saw 4 years ago, how do you take that as you move into 2016, not knowing who the presidential nominee is going to be, et cetera? But how do you try to reverse that trend in those big 4-year presidential elections?
Well, to be sure, it's good. It's a challenge. It's difficult. But we have built this new piece of technology, and the RNC has built more technology to augment what all across the country we're doing. And that's to be in touch with voters on a deeper, wider basis and talk to them about issues and turning them out more frequently in off years as well as the presidential years. And we believe this will be part of our secret sauce to give us an opportunity to win it for the president in Michigan. No doubt it's tough. Michigan is a Democrat state. We happen to do well. Even in presidential years, we down ballot did pretty well in 2012. We kept our state house. The Supreme Court, rule of law judges, conservatives, got reelected. We know how to win. We got to learn how to win at the top of the ticket in 16 elections. And you can be sure that the things that we've applied this year that have been successful and things that we've learned and new things that we're going to do will be applied in 16, and we'll be a player. There's no question about that. Better and better each time. Whether it's enough to win it, I'm confident we can get our base out, we can expand our base, we could grow our party, and we could be successful.
As we sit here today, you have to be pretty confident in the wins that you saw in an election that I still think was pretty turbulent for several months and might have gone a different way on several levels. I don't know if you're ready to break any new ground with me or not, but what is your future as the chairman of this party goes? Because that's something the party will be deciding early next year.
Yeah, in February is the next convention. Look, I've enjoyed this tremendously. I've met wonderful people throughout the state. I've been, if not all, most of the 83 counties. There is so much more to do in order to continue to be successful. I've had a good run. I've appreciated the opportunity. I've got to meet with a few people, talk with my family, look at what's coming ahead. I've enjoyed this a lot. I have to say that. It's been very inspirational. Now, whether it's right for me to continue, I've been here basically 6 years full-time, 2 years as finance, 4 years as chairman. It's been a good run. Is it time for somebody else? I'm not sure it is. If all the stars kind of align the way I think they will, I'd seek the support of the delegates for another term. But it's going to be up to them and others that have to look at my record, the things we've done. As in everything in politics, you're only as good as the moment, and people will judge me for today and hopefully remember that in February if I choose to run again.
The final word on Decision 2014 has not been written or uttered yet, and there will always be divisions about what really happened, what drove the turnout, why people didn't turn out, why they voted the way they did. But when we come back, we'll have one more note on Decision 2014. Next, to the point. So before you start with the emails, yes, The Democratic chairman, Lon Johnson, will be our guest on an upcoming show. We'll get his take on what happened in Decision 2014, and we'll tell you about what's going to happen after the election. I hope you'll join us next and every Sunday right here at 10 o'clock for To the Point.